Okay, so this is the first and possibly the last in a series that may be very embarrassing, but hopefully slightly helpful. We're looking at how science works questions, and this video is talking you through the ions, fish, leaves, grass question. So the question and the mark scheme are available on the Moodle, and here's the talk through. So here's the question. Ions of metals such as zinc often pollute rivers. The effect of zinc ions on gas exchange and respiration in fish was investigated. Fish were kept in tanks of water in a laboratory. The fish in one group X had a solution of zinc compound injected directly into their blood. So here's the fish, here they are, X, and here's the zinc, directly into their bloodstream. Okay? And they were put in a tank of zinc-free water. The second group, Y, not injected, but the solution of zinc, here we go, tank Y, the solution of zinc compound is added to the water in the tank, and there goes the zinc. The partial pressure of oxygen in the blood of both groups of fish was then monitored, and the results are shown in the graph. So here's the graph. The zinc's given after 6 hours, and after 6 hours, the partial pressure of oxygen of group X, well, it doesn't really change. We say it can remain relatively constant with fluctuations. And that's here when you inject it into the fish. When you inject it into the water, the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood goes down. You could possibly argue and then levels off. Or we could say goes down steeply at first and then the rate of decrease slows. During this investigation, the water in the two tanks is kept constant. Explain why changing the water temperature may lead to the results of the investigation being unreliable. So, what's this about? The fish are the same, the amount of zinc's the same, the volume of water's the same. Why do we need the temperature of the water to stay the same? The reason is because the concentration of oxygen in the water may be different at different temperatures. So it's in order to keep the oxygen concentration constant. And then they say, the results were compared using a statistical test to suggest a null hypothesis that could be tested. So a null hypothesis is always the hypothesis that any difference was simply due to chance. So it's the hypothesis that there is no significant difference between the partial pressure of oxygen and now you could write of the fish in group X compared with the fish in group Y, or you could write of the fish in the tank with zinc compared to the fish with zinc, or you could just simply say between the two groups. There is no significant difference between the partial pressure of oxygen in each group. Explain why it's important to use a statistical test in analysing the results of this investigation. Now, the statistical test calculates the probability that the results obtained are due to chance. And that allows us to either accept or reject the null hypothesis. Now, how do we write that out? So, the statistical test calculates the probability that the results are due to chance. This allows us to accept or reject the null hypothesis. Okay? Now, why did I write that out for you? It's because those two questions could be asked in any kind of context. They're not specific to fish, not specific to tanks, they're not specific to the data in the question, they're generic how science works questions. And we need to get the answers to those generic ones, those ones that could come up in any question, we need to get them into our noodle pip. Let's move on, part C. 2 suggestions were made to explain the results in the graph. Zinc ions reduce the rate at which oxygen is taken up from the water and passes into the blood, or zinc ions reduce the ability of the hemoglobin to transport oxygen. Which is more likely? Explain the evidence from the graph that supports your answer. So it's A that is more likely, because the partial pressure of oxygen is only reduced when the zinc is in the water. During the investigation, the pH of blood was also monitored. It decreased in group Y. Suggest an explanation for this decrease in pH. Okay, now let's look at this. Group Y have got less oxygen in their blood. So these fish in group Y have got to go about their daily business with less oxygen. So group Y are going to have to do anaerobic respiration. Therefore, they're going to produce lactic acid. And therefore there will be more hydrogen ions in their blood, which will lower the pH.